Just moments after Trump and Putin talked yesterday, Russia launched their largest drone and missile attack against Ukraine since the war began. So how's that for progress towards peace? Now, it also comes amid a reported aid freeze that Secretary Hegseth put in place against the recommendations of our military leadership. So let's get into what we know. Now, to all my fellow Americans, happy 4th of July. Hope you get a chance to get out and celebrate and relax with friends and family. As you're doing that, I'd ask that you just keep in the back of your mind that there are a lot of people around the world that are fighting today to be able to secure the freedoms that you and I enjoy day in and day out. And one of those groups is, of course, the Ukrainian people, who overnight took on 550 Russian drones and missiles. It was 539 Shahed or Garand-style UAVs and 11 missiles. This was the largest combined air attack since June 29th, just a couple days ago. And as we've mentioned in recent videos, these Russian aerial attacks are increasing week by week. So the Ukrainian need for air defense assets is increasing in kind. Now, Ukrainian Air Force says the main target of the attack, and we can see that from some of these maps showing the launch angle and location, or target location, was the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. They say, according to preliminary data, air defense was able to neutralize 478 enemy air attack vehicles, which, of course, leaves 72 to make their way through and strike targets mostly throughout Kyiv. And we can see the damage inflicted on the capital city. It does appear that there was enough advance warning that quite a few citizens were able to seek shelter, but unfortunately there's been at least one person killed from what I can see and quite a few injured. And then even today, it does look like Kyiv is covered in smoke from the fire started through these strikes. Now, Ukrainian President Zelensky put out a statement saying firefighting and clearing of debris after another Russian strike are still ongoing. This was one of their largest airstrikes, a demonstrably significant and cynical strike. The first airstrikes in our cities and regions yesterday began almost simultaneously with the beginning of the discussion in the media of the telephone conversation between President Trump and Putin. Russia once again demonstrates that it is not going to end the war and terror. The capital was the main target of the Russian strike, and it is very important that the support of partners in protecting against ballistic missiles is maintained. Patriots and missiles are real defenders of life for them. As of now, 23 people are known to have been injured. There are also many places where drone and missile fragments have fallen. Unfortunately, there are also direct hits. And all this is clear evidence that without truly large-scale pressure, Russia will not change its stupid, destructive behavior. It is necessary that for each such blow to people and life, they feel the corresponding sanctions and other blows to their economy, to their earnings, to their infrastructure. This is the only thing that can be achieved quickly to change the situation for the better, and this depends on partners, primarily the United States. Now, I don't know, it's the 4th of July, so there's a part of me that wonders if this hits Americans more today as we celebrate our independence and the Ukrainians are trying to defend the sovereignty of their nation and defend their citizens against an invading force day in and day out. I'm not overly optimistic because I feel like we're just more and more focused on other things maybe and losing any attention as to the impact this war might have on us in the future, let alone the impact it's having on countless people today. We are going to get into that. There was actually a couple organizations now, notably right-leaning organizations, that are really starting to push back on President Trump and Secretary Hegseth around their handling of this war. Now, for the Russian part, their battle damage assessment is as to be expected. They hit everything they wanted to, and everything was a military facility. They say last night the armed forces of the Russian Federation delivered a massive strike with Kinzhal hypersonic air-launched ballistic missiles as well as long-range drones. They said they went after industrial enterprises developing and manufacturing UAVs, FPV drones, and other robotic systems, various equipment for use in the military. They say this goal of the strike was achieved. All of the assigned targets were engaged. And as is the norm, we also have plenty of pictures and videos showing what appear to be clear residential structures that were also hit. Now, this comes amidst a bit of a controversy here in the United States that should be getting more attention than it is. We're going to do our best here to try to keep this top of mind. NBC just came out with an article saying that Secretary Hegseth halted weapons for Ukraine despite military analysis that the aid would not jeopardize U.S. readiness. This is big. Just a couple days ago, and we reported on it, the Politico article saying that this aid went into effect, and it caught everyone off guard. That was followed by an article in the Wall Street Journal that just said, what the hell's happening here? This is a problem. President Trump needs to undo this. The New York Post, also a right-leaning organization, came out yesterday saying the same thing. And then NBC today with a little more detail saying the reason that Hegseth gave for pausing these shipments is not genuine. I should mention that right now, the reason that this is not getting the attention that I think it deserves is it's the 4th of July, so there's going to be a lot of focus on those celebrations, and we're in the midst of this major domestic bill moving through Congress and possibly being signed by President Trump today. That is sucking up all of the media attention. So this little aspect here where there's allegations that our Defense Department is acting kind of outside the bounds of Congress, outside the bounds of presidential directives, and kind of outside the bounds of military advice, that's notable in so many ways. And it's just, I feel like we're going to talk about it as much as we can. They say the move blindsided the State Department, Ukraine, European allies, and members of Congress who demanded an explanation from the Pentagon. The Defense Department held up a shipment of U.S. weapons for Ukraine this week over what officials said were concerns about its low stockpiles. But an analysis by senior military officers found that the aid package would not jeopardize the American military's own ammunition supplies, according to 3 U.S. officials. And that was the original statement given. It was like, hey, look, America first. We're going to need this stuff. We might need it in terms of a fight with China at some point down the road. So we just can't afford to give the 252 Gimlers and 30 Patriot interceptors that are in Poland ready to go. Those can't go to Ukraine. They need to come back here to the United States. They say the move to halt the weapons shipments blindsided the State Department, members of Congress, officials in Kyiv, and European allies, according to multiple sources with knowledge of the matter. And I think we could kind of see that in recent days. Just in yesterday's video, I was clear, I don't actually know what happened here because everybody had a different answer. The White House saying, yeah, it was the right move. European allies saying, what? And the State Department saying, what? Also, it was the right move. And then the DOD just saying it's all fake news. It's an entirely false narrative. And more on their explanation here in a second, but it fits that this was kind of a singular decision made without consultation to a lot of other organizations and allies. They quote Adam Smith, a Democratic lawmaker out of Washington State, that said his staff has seen the numbers, and without going into detail, there's no indication of a shortage that would justify suspending aid to Ukraine. The review began after Hegseth issued a memo ordering the Pentagon's joint staff to review stockpiles of all munitions. The joint staff concluded that providing continued assistance to Ukraine would not drain U.S. supplies below a required threshold needed to ensure military readiness. So, look, I got it. We cannot go to zero. The New York Post hits on this in a moment. We can't go to zero and send every possible thing to Ukraine. That's not rational. But there is some line in there that we don't want to go below. And that where that line sits, I'm sure could be debated. But what they're saying right here is we're not close to that. We still have what we need right now, which means the rationale given by the DOD is not honest or is not accurate. It means there must be other motivations as to why this is happening. If that reporting is accurate, that would also explain why, when looking at Sean Parnell, White House or Pentagon spokesperson the other day, he was so evasive with these answers. There was no clear, yes, we froze aid, but it was like justifying the decision without saying the decision was made, if that makes sense. Now, I did get some feedback from you all in the video yesterday saying sometimes it is worthwhile hearing this rambling firsthand. So I think this is one worth showing. This is Sean Parnell at the DOD getting asked about this exact issue. And now that we have the background of this might have been a unilateral decision made against the wishes of U.S. military officials, gives it a little more context here. Let's give that a listen.
Could you be more specific about the nature of the pause in weapons being provided to Ukraine? When did it begin? What munitions are being affected here? And then who was involved in the review that you're describing right now? And is that still ongoing?
I can't get involved. I can't go in detail about what weapons were paused and when, and what we're providing and when. Ultimately, the president and the secretary will make those decisions about what happens with those weapon systems, obviously keeping in mind that the president was elected on an America First platform to put America first. And so our job as political appointees here in the Department of Defense is to provide the president a range of options to do just that.
So again, kind of the beating around the bush, normal spokesperson stuff there, unfortunately. But a key point that I keep seeing in a lot of these arguments against sending aid to Ukraine, of course, is America first. It's our equipment. We need it. We should hold on to it. And the New York Post came out with some criticism of this, I think laying out in a good way of, hey, sometimes supplying our allies, and in this case, Ukraine against Russia, is putting America first. This will benefit the United States in very tangible ways. So again, New York Post, right-leaning organization. This is the second one in a couple days, Wall Street Journal being the first to come out pretty strongly against Trump and Hegseth's move here to stop aid to Ukraine. They say Trump must reverse the dangerous Ukraine aid halt. Trump's minions, and they don't hold back here. I think they went for the kill more than the Wall Street Journal did, so prepare yourself. They said Trump's minions, or Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, have done some faulty risk assessment here. The consequences of letting Russia conquer its neighbor will be far more dire than a less than full weapons store. Convinced that China is a far bigger threat than Russia, Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary for Policy that this was originally pinned on, although since then it's kind of gone back to maybe being more of a Secretary of Defense decision. Anyways, they say Colby has long argued that the United States should be redirecting resources away from Ukraine and towards deterring war in Taiwan. That's a false choice. It's not help Ukraine or deter China. It's help Ukraine and deter China. Beijing is a threat, and that's exactly why we need to keep arming Kyiv to the teeth. The best way to signal to China and all of America's enemies that naked aggression won't be tolerated is ensuring that Russia's bid to conquer Ukraine fails. Letting Kyiv fall can only make Washington look like an unreliable ally that can be spooked or seduced into backing out of a fight. That puts Taiwan in direct danger and undermines our credibility as the world's most powerful military force. Maintaining a healthy weapons stockpile is important, but aiding Ukraine is the best way to preserve U.S. national security and global stability. Again, I think the New York Post does a good job laying that out. This stuff is all interconnected. We can't fully separate one from the other, as is mentioned now, just yesterday, South China Morning Post, how China actually wants Russia to keep this war going because it's good for their interest, that we stay too focused there and can't divert attention towards the Pacific. But again, if you're talking about a desire to send more aid or less aid to Ukraine, and we're trying to balance it in this context of what about China, we have to keep in mind that these are very, very different fights. A China-Taiwan fight would be very heavily focused on air power and or naval-based power. That's really not a component of what's happening in Ukraine, which tends to be drones and long-range artillery. So even take the GMLRS piece out of it, which, again, we're talking about 250 going to Ukraine versus the 14,000 produced by the United States each year. So you'd think that maybe we could make that up in short order. But the 155 millimeter artillery rounds, that's not going to be the make or break in Taiwan. And I don't think anybody's suggesting that it is. The AT-4 anti-tank rockets, again, not a make or break for the war between China and the United States in the Pacific. But it is something that Ukraine is using day in and day out to repel the active Russian invasion on their border. So if nothing else, can we be more deliberate in splitting this down a little bit and saying we need to keep A, B, and C for the United States for now, but we can send X, Y, and Z to Ukraine. Now, I mentioned the interesting timing here for this New York Post article to come out and say, hey, Ukraine is not just about Ukraine, and Russia, but this is about deterring China as well, because the South China Morning Post just published an article where they say the Chinese foreign minister told the European Union's top minister on Wednesday Beijing cannot afford a Russian loss in Ukraine because it fears the United States would then shift its entire focus to Beijing. They say the comment to the EU's Kaja Kallas would confirm what many in Brussels believe to be Beijing's position, but jar with China's public utterances. The foreign ministry regularly says China is not a party to the war. Some EU officials involved were surprised by the frankness of Wang's remarks. Wang is said to have rejected, however, the accusation that China was materially supporting Russia's war effort, financially or militarily, insisting that if it was doing so, the conflict would have ended long ago. Like that move. We're not involved. That we're not involved, because if we were, we would have ended this war. It's kind of what China's saying there. It's not a shocking statement. It's one of those where it's more interesting that it's being said out loud, but this has long been kind of the assumption that the United States getting tied up anywhere at all. I mean, the same is true for the U.S. getting tied down with the Houthis or with Iran in the Middle East. That benefits China. So if our big concern is China, there's a couple different ways to look at that. Is it to completely abandon Ukraine and shift entire focus to the Asia Pacific? I guess technically you could make that argument. I would say doing that brings us into that potential fight in a weaker place. But you can see that we cannot ignore the connection between the war between Russia and Ukraine and any sort of future conflict between the United States and China. We can't afford to ignore that when our adversaries are noticing exactly how connected those two are. Now, to this end, President Trump continues to say that his focus is on achieving peace in the region and that he was not happy with yesterday's call with Vladimir Putin. And we have a short clip of him talking about that and a coming call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Let's give that a quick listen.
I'm speaking to President Zelensky tomorrow, early in the morning, and I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, because I don't think he's there. I don't think he's there, and I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not, I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop, and that's too bad. This is Biden. This isn't me. This is Biden's war. It wouldn't have happened if I were president. It wouldn't have happened. So, I in one way, I had to get too involved because it's Biden's war. And I got stuck in the middle of it, just like I did with immigration and a lot of other things that they screwed up. But I was not happy with the conversation, no.
All right, so not happy with the conversation. Again, we didn't get any, as far as I can tell, any readouts from the White House or the State Department about that call. The Kremlin did, and theirs was, it's all great. We talked about maybe sharing movies and future economic projects, and we discussed Ukraine, just finding a solution. And the Kremlin statement stressed that they made clear they're going to continue through to complete their objectives. Trump continuing to say that it's clear that Putin is not planning on ending the war is like, yes. It's frustrating. Like, I don't know how that message is not getting through. A part of me wonders if maybe he's just overly optimistic and thinks he has such a relationship with Putin that, sure, everybody says Putin's going to keep going, but I can be the difference maker. I can be the guy to get him to stop, because at this point, I mean, there's really no indication that Putin has any desire to stop the war on anything but his absolute terms of victory. I mean, I don't think I've seen a single source suggest anything otherwise, to include Russian sources that are saying even today, like, yeah, we're just going to keep going until we win this war. Now, there was the call just a few hours ago between President Trump and President Zelensky. That readout, we didn't get the readout. We got a summary from Zelensky that's worth running through here. As of this recording, nothing from the United States. That might come out shortly after. If it does, I'll link that in the description as well. President Zelensky said, quote, "A very important and useful conversation with U.S. President Donald Trump. I congratulated President Trump and the entire American people on Independence Day, as did the Ukrainian GUR and a bunch of other Ukrainian units. For what it's worth, they sent over nice videos and graphics saying Happy 4th. He says, we in Ukraine are grateful for all the support provided, which allows us to protect people's lives and our independence, which have done a lot together with America and support all efforts to stop the killings and restore a normal, stable, dignified peace. A decent agreement is needed for peace, and Ukraine supports American proposals. Today, we talked about the situation, about Russian airstrikes, and more broadly about the situation on the front. President Trump is very well informed. Thank you for this attention to Ukraine. We discussed the possibilities of air defense and agreed that we will work on increasing the protection on the sky. We agreed on a corresponding meeting of our teams. We also talked in detail about the capabilities of the defense industry, about the possibilities of joint production. We are ready for direct projects with America and believe that this is extremely necessary for security, especially regarding drones and related technologies. We discussed mutual purchases and investments, exchanged views on the diplomatic situation, and joint work with America and other partners. So a couple of keynotes there. Nothing about the aid freeze. It sounds like that was not brought up between Trump and Putin yesterday. And Zelensky didn't talk about that at all here. I can kind of understand that, because that seems like a politically tenuous subject. If Zelensky starts coming out arguing about that, it's probably going to push Trump in the direction that he doesn't want. I took note here to a couple aspects of the possibilities of joint work, joint production in the defense industry, especially regarding drones and related technologies. That'd be interesting. And I understand there's a lot of arguments against providing Ukraine with aid going forward, especially when it's viewed as a gift from the United States. But what about joint production? What about something that brings jobs to the United States, brings investment to the United States? We can help provide resources and equipment that Ukraine needs today that maybe we can then sell to other allies as well. I'd be interesting to see it. It does look like this is being approached with a pretty open mind as to different ways the two sides can work together. Now, another big aspect here is we're talking about these aid freezes right now of what was already committed to Ukraine. We've talked in recent videos how there's no indication that there is a future bill that's going to be presenting Ukraine with any additional U.S. military equipment. I don't see that on the agenda at all. Strangely, yesterday, a U.S. representative, Anna Paulina Luna, just kind of went on a bit of a rant about how she will never support more aid to Ukraine, and she's very much against it. The timing was interesting. When you look at how everything is happening here, we've got the large-scale Russian strikes, the allegations that the Defense Department unilaterally stopped equipment moving into Ukraine, and then out of left field, again, because this vote is it's not even being discussed right now. She posted things. She is on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, so this isn't like a nobody, right? But she said, I won't vote for any more Ukraine aid funding, and then just went down the list of all of the reasons. There's too many weapons being sold in the black market. What? Disrespected the president and the vice president, money laundering, churches have been shut down, like all sorts, the whole gambit, right? She just went down top to bottom. It's frustrating to see this stuff still articulated at all. Let alone by a U.S. lawmaker, because a lot of this is, at the very least, heavily exaggerated, if not just completely made up. But here we are 3 years into the war, and this stuff is still getting repeated, unfortunately. Now, Ukraine, for their part, as the United States, no matter what, at this point, does look like we're going to be backing down from the continuation, or at least an increase of military aid going forward. We are starting to see Ukraine go after different resources inside of Russia. And overnight, they went after a pretty notable one here. Right now, it's just the claim, but we should wait for some more evidence here in the next couple days. Ukraine says, as a part of reducing the enemy's ability to launch airstrikes, on July 4th, units of the Unmanned Systems Forces hit JSC FNPC Research Institute of Applied Chemistry in the Moscow region. They say this specific building, this company, was engaged in the production of thermobaric warheads for Shahed UAVs. So Shahed and Garand-style long-range drones, the 400 plus that were used last night to fire into Ukraine. They say it's been confirmed that our means of destruction directly hit the target. A fire and heavy smoke was recorded in the area of the facility. The results of the destruction are being clarified. So we'll wait here for confirmation. Maybe it'll be satellite imagery. For what it's worth, in recent days, we've had a lot of Ukrainian claims of pretty significant strikes against factories, against airfields, things like that. And we have not gotten the footage immediately, but 48 hours or so after, the satellite imagery is backing up these claims. So Ukraine's on a roll right now. From everything I've seen, I would expect that we get satellite imagery confirming the destruction, or at least the damage to this Shahed warhead production facility. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.